Well, thanks so much for having me. My name is Gregor P. Schmitz. I'll be hosting this panel. I have hosted it a few times in the past. I never really noticed that it's really called Talking Heads, the section, which is fitting because it's one of my favorite bands, and one of the favorite albums is called Stop Making Sense. I'm going to try to do the very opposite now, trying to make sense here on this panel when it comes to the very much changing environment of IT security. And I'm pretty sure we're going to make sense because we have assembled a stellar cast of characters again on this panel. Some of them have been stalwarts of this conference for a number of years and don't really need an introduction, but I'm going to introduce them nevertheless very briefly. We have Alex Stamos here, who has been with us a number of times over the years. He just told us that he would love to come to Munich in February, so maybe next year it will be possible again. He is now with Stanford. He has been a chief security officer, both at Facebook and Yahoo. He's spoken on 6 continents, holds 5 patents, so what else is there to say? But what I like about him in his bio is that he's always referred to as the Forrest Gump of InfoSec by friends. So that is... I think a title that everyone should aspire to. I'm not sure that Thomas Tschersich is going to be called the Forrest Gump of Deutsche Telekom. I hope not, but he's definitely the go-to guy for IT security at Deutsche Telekom, where he has been working for a number of years, and he's in charge of everything related to IT security. So welcome, Thomas. And we have Bruce Schneier, who also doesn't need an introduction. He's with the Kennedy School of Government, my alma mater. So hi to Cambridge. He's actually flying back to Cambridge, I think, for the first time this weekend. He hasn't been there in a long time. And he just told me that I shouldn't worry about Harvard because Harvard has more money than God, even in the corona crisis. So hi, Bruce. He has written a number of books. I think the most outstanding one, or the most happening one, is still the one with the title "Click Here to Kill Everybody." And how is this panel going to work? We're going to have a very brief introduction or opening remarks by Bruce. He doesn't share his presentation because he just told us that no one wants to see PowerPoint now on Zoom. So it's going to be a very brief chat, basically, at the beginning. Then we're going to discuss here for 20 minutes on the panel, and then we want to open it up to questions. You can write questions to the moderator or to the editors. Please remember that a question has a question mark at the end. It shouldn't be a statement, even when we are online. And now the floor is yours, Bruce. I'm looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you. So, Alex, I think you and I should host a conference on an Antarctic cruise ship so we can have spoken on 7 continents. That really seems like a good idea. I don't know if the penguins want to hear what we have to say, but I don't know. Maybe they'll listen more than other people we speak to. I actually want to make 3 points. Actually, first I want to say that it's really nice to be with everybody, and I truly wish we could be together in person and hope that next year we are again having conferences. I'm jealous of the Australians who have licked COVID so well that they are having in-person conferences. So anyway, I want to make 3 points about security. I think it's really relevant right now. The first is that patching is failing as a security paradigm. I mean, patching is how we get security. The reason this object, our phones and our computers, are as secure as they are, for 2 reasons. There's a team of engineers at Apple and Microsoft and Google designing them to be secure. And those same engineers are available to quickly and effectively push security patches down to our phones and computers when a new vulnerability exploit is discovered. That ecosystem doesn't work for modern low-cost embedded systems like home routers or DVRs. They're built at a much lower profit margin offshore. They don't have dedicated security teams associated with them. And a lot of them can't be patched. I mean, right now, the way you patch your home router is you throw it away and buy a new one. That's the patch mechanism. But that actually does work. The life cycle of our phones and computers is what? 3 years. That also isn't true for low-cost embedded systems. You're going to replace your, DVR every 5 to 10 years. Your refrigerator every 25 years. I bought a new thermostat 2 years ago. I expect to replace it never. And that is a security issue. And if you think about it, you buy a car today, So let's make it up. The software is 2 years old. You buy it, drive for 10 years, sell it. Someone else buys it. They drive for 10 years. They sell it. Probably at this point, it gets put in a boat, sent to Africa or Latin America, where someone else buys it, drives another 10 to 20 years. All right. So you try to find a computer from 1979. Try to boot it up. Try to make it work. We have no idea how to maintain 40-year-old consumer software. Right? There's a reason Apple, Microsoft depreciate operating systems. So this notion of patching, which is really the mainstay of security right now, is going to start failing as all of these non-computer devices come online. Second thing I see failing is authentication. And authentication kind of only just barely ever worked. Human memorizable passwords just aren't good in a lot of situations. Two-factor is great, but it doesn't work in a bunch of places, and people don't like it. Backup authentication systems are terrible. But the amount of authenticating we're going to do is going to explode exponentially. Normally, authenticating is one of two things. I'm going to demonstrate them. All right, I logged into my phone with my face, and I just checked my email. I logged into a remote service. And that worked. So I did it really easy. But we're going to start seeing the rise of thing-to-thing authentication. Internet of Things, 5G, is not about you watching Netflix faster. It's about things talking to things behind your back. And whether it's sensors or actuators, anything in your orbit, we're going to have to authenticate them to each other. And we don't know how to do that at scale. We could do that a little bit. Bluetooth works, right? I go into my car, this automatically authenticates. But I was there to set that up manually. And that's not going to work for hundreds or thousands or millions of things. The third thing that's failing is supply chain, which honestly is an insurmountably hard problem. In the past few years, we've been talking about Huawei. Right? Should we trust Chinese networking equipment? A few years before that, it was Kaspersky. Should we trust Russian antivirus equipment? And this is an important security question. Right? Can you trust technology built in a country whose government you don't trust? But that is just the beginning of a very large problem. Right? This is a U.S. product, but it's not made in the U.S. Its chips aren't fabbed in the U.S. Its programmers carry, 100 different passports. And we have discovered backdoors in Juniper firewalls, D-Link routers. There have been backdoors that attempted to be put in all sorts of public domain systems on GitHub. And there's a lot. Well, you have to trust the development process, the distribution mechanism, fake apps in the Google Play Store, the update mechanism, right? NotPetya, SolarWinds, the shipping mechanism, right? The NSA stuck a backdoor into a Cisco router destined to the Syrian telephone company. In the Snowden archives, we have photographs. And this is a really hard problem. I mean, you could imagine a US-only iPhone, it'll cost 10 times as much, no one will buy it. That we are a deeply, deeply interconnected international industry. And you have to trust every aspect of the supply chain and can't trust any of them. And we really don't have a good answer to this. And this is now increasingly an attack vector that governments and criminals are using. So that's what I want to start with, and I'd love to get into more into conversation.
Well, thanks so much, Bruce. Picking up on that, a question to you, Alex, and also Thomas. Do you think when we look at risks, what has changed because of the pandemic now? Maybe if you want to start, Alex.
Sure. So one of the things the pandemic has done is it's massively accelerated a couple of trends that we had in enterprise IT. One was flexibility around people's work conditions, right? So there's been this idea that has been embraced by a lot of companies, actually implemented correctly by a smaller number, of this idea of zero trust networks, that you could build your corporate networks in a way that being at home, being in a coffee shop, being in the office are all the same thing from a technical perspective, that you don't get any special access from being physically in the office, and that you don't lose any access or telemetry or security benefits from being out of the office. The reality is, a lot of people have talked about zero trust networking. The reality is there's only a handful of companies that really implemented it before COVID. And effectively, over a 3-month period last year, a huge number of companies had to deploy the same kind of ideas without having a plan and without having the months or years necessary to architect how to do so in a way that's non-disruptive. And so we've seen this massive change in the way that systems are managed remotely. In a lot of cases, companies don't have the kind of telemetry they used to have. So in some cases, people have been effective in saying that the same kind of security protections are in place, but in most cases not. And that's because the kind of traditional security products that we've bought, the pizza boxes that we put into a closet in a wiring closet in an office that allow us to get telemetry across the entire network, allow us to do net flow access or network recording or DNS aggregation. Those kinds of things don't work anymore. And there are other things you can do to try to get the same kind of security controls. And in some cases, they've been deployed, in some cases not, which has created a very complicated situation for enterprise IT.
You mentioned earlier when we talked that you are even consulting vaccine makers like AstraZeneca or so. What are they particularly concerned about when it comes to IT security?
Yeah, so I can't talk about any specific clients, but there are a number of companies, including vaccine makers and such, who are now bigger targets. And I think what we've seen over the last 6 months is a demonstration of the fact that the line that used to exist, that above this line you had to be worried about really high-end attackers who have months or years to break into your company, no longer exists, right? So like 20 years ago, the only people who had to worry about a professional intelligence team that was dedicated to attacking them was the defense industrial base, right? The Northrop Grummans, the BAE systems, and the like. And then you had oil and gas, you had telecom, you had big banks, you had big tech in the late 2000s, early 2010s. And what's happened over the last several years is that a number of groups have demonstrated the value of breaking in to a very broad swath of companies. And that's what we've learned through both the SVR attacks, including SolarWinds, as well as the attacks against 86,000 exchange servers by a Chinese group, is that line has effectively disappeared. And we're now in a place where a very broad swath of industry needs to be prepared to play against a level of adversary that, again, was only faced by kind of defense companies 10 years ago.
Thomas, what was your experience like at Deutsche Telekom? Would you share Alex's assessment?
Yeah, I share what Alex and Bruce said before. And for me, some call it pandemia. Yeah, I call it the biggest digitization project on the planet we ever had in the history. And this shows me that we're running into a lot of problems, especially in cases where people are naively connecting their stuff to the internet. And this happens a lot just because of the need to be able to work from abroad or to work from remote out of the home office. And people who are running lazy with their IT are more in danger than ever before. So we see a new really peak of all the ransomware attacks. I have a lot of clients who got their whole infrastructure encrypted the last couple of months. So this is really a growing trend. And at the other side, and this was really major point Bruce made before, we also see now how vulnerable are our supply chains. And it's not only because of the supply chain attacks, it's also because of the dependency of several regions of the world. What we experience is when there is a shutdown because of a pandemic in a certain region in the world, we directly see the impact 4 weeks later in Europe, for instance, as we don't get any more supply. We're now running into a chip crisis. It was driven by different factors, but it was driven by the economic war between the US and China. It's driven by the COVID crisis, and now it comes all together. And so the world is now really showing how complex we became over time. And the good question is how to deal with that in future and how to solve that and how to find solutions, especially like the example of Bruce. Yeah, I'm always using the example in my speeches, how to patch your fridge. It might not be enough just to put a CD in the deep fridge part. So we need to find solutions for that. And this shows the whole dramaturgy of the situation we are in. Yeah, so we have lost control over the existing infrastructures. We have lost control about the supply chain. So where's the way out?
So, if you listen to Thomas saying that it's the biggest digitalization project in history. What is your take? Is the glass half full or half empty? I mean, are we making progress in controlling cyber risks, or are we falling farther behind?
I mean, both are true. I mean, every year we get better technologies, better ideas, better security, but every year the threat also gets worse. And I mean, Alex makes a really good point. I don't know, a mid-level power company in the middle of Ohio against the Russian government just isn't a fair fight. And now we're expecting that, that level of threat. And at the same time, I think it's becoming more connected, more digitized, into a lower price point, right? Where fridges and toys are not secured at the same level as computers. So things are just getting much more complicated. And risk is going up. The nation state actors are getting more aggressive. China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and the list is growing. So I think this is really becoming a national security issue in a way it didn't. We really now have to worry about interconnected toys taking down critical infrastructure, and that's really hard for policy.
Yeah. And what is your impression, maybe a question to both of you, when you talk to political actors? I mean, do you get the impression that they understand the seriousness of this challenge, that they even have the resources, the intellectual resources to grapple with these issues? Or what is your take when you talk to people in Washington or Brussels or Berlin?
I mean, no, at least, in the U.S., no, this is too technical, and we're still running our tech policy for the short-term financial interests of a bunch of billionaires. I mean, it's a really stupid way to run society, but it's what we do. We're not looking at broader issues.
What is your take, Alex?
Yeah, I think so things have gone a little bit better with the new administration, and that they're, under the Trump administration, we effectively had pretty much nobody working on cyber from a coordination perspective at the White House. There are a lot of good people at various agencies who are trying to do work, but there is very little leadership. We've now kind of gone completely the opposite direction, where we've gone from nobody doing cyber to everybody doing cyber in the government. And so we now have a deputy national security advisor for cyber, Ann Neuberger. We have a new position, a national cyber coordinator. That's going to be a guy named Chris Inglis. We're going to have a director of CISA, a deputy director of CISA. The Secretary of Homeland Security is very interested in cyber. So there's actually now a lot of people who are getting their hands in the policy bucket. And we do have some movement. There is going to be an executive order that comes into the White House, maybe next week, maybe a couple of weeks from now, which is going to directly address supply chain issues for companies that sell into the federal government, as well as to start down the path of something that people like Bruce and I have been talking about for a long time, which is the idea of an agency that investigates these kinds of breaches and helps educate people of what went wrong. That's a problem that we have around the world, which is these breaches happen and there's nobody's job to come up with what the society level fixes are. We have that for airplane crashes, right? Yeah. We have it for a bunch of for when a train derails. When we have a boat gets stuck in a canal, like there's root cause analysis, but there isn't on cyber. That there at least is some movement in Washington from the White House, from our Congress. There has been nothing useful yet.
But when you talk about educating people, do you think largely academia to come up with solutions with regards to the future of cybersecurity?
Good, Bruce.
I mean, it's less tech solutions and more policy solutions. We have a lot of tech. And the problem is we don't have the economic incentives for companies to use it. So I'm less worried about tech and I'm much more worried about policy. I need the economic incentives to change, which is changing policy.
So may I jump in here? So I don't think we need more policy here in that space. What we really need is more collaboration. Yeah, I would say even if the situation is really worse at the moment, the glass is still half full and not half empty. But look, making an easy example, when you do as a company buy some corporate sneakers, for sure you won't produce them by yourself. Yeah, you go to Nike, Adidas, or whomever to make that for you happen. But when it comes to IT, everybody feels, oh, a computer, I'm the profession in computer and I do it all by myself. Yeah, even if I'm the world leader in producing a specific screw or whatever, they all run their own IT. And this is, I guess, the biggest failure. We need more cooperation. We need more focus also on what we're doing, what we're good in, and to bring that knowledge better together than we're doing it today. Cyber defense, for instance, is a high complex topic to deal with. And if you don't have the experts available for that, that's a battle you can't really win.
But if I understand you correctly, both Bruce and also Thomas, then every progress in law enforcement and norms and so on will fully depend on the willingness and also the incentives for the tech industry to comply with new or to abide to new security standards. How are we going to change that? I mean, you were pretty gloomy, Bruce.
Yeah, we do not have an economic system where companies willingly lose money for social benefit. That's not what we do, and we shouldn't. If we expect companies to, not employ child labor and not buy and sell kidneys and have better cybersecurity, we actually need government regulations. That is the way we do things. Companies don't like this. Right? They don't want that, and anybody in the audience who's a company is going to tell me why we shouldn't do that. But we're not going to fix security unless we actually piss big companies off. This is no other way.
Well, Alex, you worked for some of these big companies. Is there any shift in the companies?
I mean, there has been. I think one of the issues here is we have a bunch of different security problems, actually, right? So you have big companies on the high end that are spending a lot of money on security. There are different things that they need to do in some cases to protect against this level of adversary, but they at least see it as a priority and they have an investment. And so companies that are doing okay are the ones that have threat intelligence teams, that have teams that can monitor and react in real time, that have the ability to understand what's going on in their network, that have all of their data in one place. Then we have a huge chunk of companies for which we have real issues in that they have security teams, but they're not ready to play at this level. And they're not ready for the, professional team from the SVR to spend 6 months breaking in. And we don't have any really good ways to increase the leverage in those companies to take their current event. So they probably need to invest more, but even if they're spending the money, we just don't have people sitting around who have experience doing incident response against the Ministry of State Security who don't have jobs, right? Like it's not like there's a huge, so we do have to look at kind of society level things to increase capacity. And then at the small end, the real problem, something that's killing people is ransomware. And I get calls all the time. There's not much I can do from them of companies that are important, right? Like a construction company that sells $1 billion a year that has tens of thousands of employees to go and build things, getting shut down by a ransomware attack. You're never going to have them to have a big, properly skilled security team. Like they could increase their investment, but you're talking about there are thousands and thousands of firms at that size, and that's a real challenge that we're probably going to have to also really go offensive, both legally and technically, against the ransomware teams to start to make it not as profitable. Because while we can improve our protections there, realistically, there's just way too many potential victims to do so.
Thomas, have you increased your investment at Deutsche Telekom?
We do, and we spend a couple of millions every year for cyber defense, for our networks, for our infrastructure. But the problem, let me come back to the point of regulation. The problem with the regulation is that in the current regimes, we are trying to regulate at the companies who are using the technologies, but we don't see the full supply chain yet. Yeah. So when we really want to make a difference, we need to start on the vendor of a certain technology. For instance, if we as Deutsche Telekom are running a core router in our network, we are relying on the vendor to get a software update, to get the vulnerability fixed, as we don't have access to the source codes of these components. Yeah. So if we want to have here a better approach for the future, and there are some suggestions on the table in the European market, for instance, and we need to include the vendors, the ones operating the stuff, and the users as well. Yeah, so we need to care on all entities dealing with the tech. It's not only enough to talk to the operators, and this is what we mostly see in the current regulation. Yeah. So, but think about if you buying a car or whatever, there is a CE regulation in the European market, and you can simply forbid a vendor to sell its stuff if it's not meeting the requirements. But this is valid for mostly everything except IT security.
But when we talk about regulation and when we talk about the political environment, we have people here in the audience from both Europe and the US. Who do you think will be the front runner or be on the forefront in creating a legal framework? The European Commission, where you see a growing inclination to regulate big tech, or the US, where you see a similar movement, or have seen a similar movement for a number of years? And you mentioned, Alex, that there is more of an effort now by the new incoming administration. So do you think it will be a European or an American thing to curb big tech? Question to all of you who wants to jump in first.
I mean, so there's all kinds of curb big tech discussions. I mean, I think one thing people talk about is antitrust, in which there's movement in both sides, but it seems like some of that is more aggressive in Europe. There's discussions around content control. So we're never really going to have rules around content in the United States in the same way you can in Europe because of the First Amendment. But for that area, like the most aggressive democracy is actually India. And we're seeing right now, okay, so if I was in Munich, what I'd be hearing all the time from Europeans is we need more regulation of big tech companies. I'm just going to point out, there are a lot of democracies in the world, and most of the democracies in the world do not have human rights-based protections around freedom of speech and don't have protections for the speech of political minorities. And that's what's happening right now in India, is that you have the Indian government using a legal system, using court orders to silence people who are questioning the handling of the pandemic by Narendra Modi. In fact, a man was not just silenced, but then arrested for tweeting that he was looking for oxygen for his. So we got to be real careful about when you talk about this balance of who has power over the speech of individuals, of how much of that power do you shift into governments. And the truth is that like a lot of this door was opened by NetzDG in Germany, that after Germany demonstrated we're going to have our speech rules be applied by the tech companies without lawful process on a per piece of speech basis, right? There's no court order required or anything. We're just going to push our legal requirements into the companies. We saw a huge number of countries, the Turkey, Russia, Vietnam, a bunch of countries now talk about having the same kind of controls. And that's what we're seeing in India. So, it's one thing to say the company should be smaller, but and there are like normal antitrust mechanisms for that, but we have to be really careful about the kinds of controls we put on people's speech. And because it's very difficult to decide why does Germany get to have those kinds of controls and India doesn't? There's no good way for the companies to decide which of these laws they should pass or not, or they should follow or not. And so as a result, if they're following all these local laws, you're going to end up with some pretty significant suppression of human rights.
But what is your take, Bruce? Is there no good way to curb big tech?
So separately, let's talk about security and privacy, and there we're seeing lots of pushes of government. I look to Europe first. Europe really is the regulatory superpower on the planet, and they're large enough. So GDPR, we can discuss whether we like it or not, but that's a big push towards privacy. California, in the United States, has state laws there, and then we are also seeing security laws. California has an Internet of Things security law. Europe is looking at that. Europe is looking at ways to regulate AI safety and security. So I think the action comes from the EU, and then in the United States from some of the states, particularly New York, Massachusetts, and California. The neat thing about good laws, Alex talked about a race to the bottom. And if you have speech suppression laws around the planet, companies trying to comply with all of them, you end up with a very bad world outcome. But for security laws, it's the opposite. Right? California has an IoT security law. One of the provisions is no default passwords. Right? Any company that sells, I would say, a thermostat is not going to have two different thermostats, one for California, one for everybody else. They're going to take out a default password and sell it worldwide. So good laws for security and privacy in a large enough market move the entire planet. When I worked for IBM, they said, we're going to implement GDPR worldwide because it's easier than figuring out who is a European. So I like seeing good security laws in big markets.
Let's talk briefly about artificial intelligence before we open it up for questions from the audience. Do you think AI is potentially a tool that is going to improve cybersecurity or not?
All right, I'm going to start because I just wrote an essay on AI hackers, which I urge people to download. All right, so the answer is we don't know. Right? There's an arms race here. And AI benefits attack, it benefits defense, and we don't know how this is going to shake out in the end. AI advances are very discontinuous. Things we think are easy are hard. Things we think are hard turn out to be easy. And as technologies ratchet up, it's hard to know who's going to come out on top. Near term, I think AI benefits defense because already computers are attacking at computer speed, and we're not defending at computer speeds. And we have this skill shortage, which Alex mentioned. And the more AIs can help augment and speed up human response, we get a real near-term benefit. But long-term, your guess is as good as mine.
Thomas and Alex, your take?
Yeah, so in my view, first of all, most of the things we're calling AI these days are artificial for sure, but mostly not intelligent. Yeah. So I would say it's more about machine learning we're still dealing with, and it's far away from being real AI. Nevertheless, we will enter that space, and we'll come closer and closer to that, even if it would take some time. But the challenge with that will be that attackers also using these technologies. They're also using this to adopt their mechanism. So it's an ongoing battle on the defense and on the attack side, which helping both of them. Yeah, for sure, it's helped to find the needle in the needle stack. Yeah, so we're by far not any longer searching for needles in haystacks. We're searching for needles in needle stacks. And for the attackers, it helps them to find the weak point, the single one in your huge infrastructure. And that's the challenge. And with regards to the regulation, I guess it's the wrong question to ask who is the first in doing the regulation on it, whether it's AI or whether it's IT security or IoT security. It must be more the question how to overcome that different kind of approaches, how to work closer together as we are all connected via internet connections, just some milliseconds away from each other. But we're still behaving in our regulation regime as we're really far away from each other, which is true for the physical world, but it's not true for the digital world anymore.
Alex, your brief take before we turn to the audience.
I mean, AI is a massively one. There's much more artificial than intelligence in current AI. So I'm going to use the term machine learning. Machine learning is a massively overhyped from both its downsides and upsides. And so I'm not going to offer opinion because I'm not going to feed into it. To be honest.
Okay, great. That was brief in any case. So we want to open up to the audience, and there's a bunch of questions. So I'm asking you to keep your answers short so that we can ask as many questions as possible. There is one from the audience for you, Thomas, from Deutsche Telekom. Does everything need to be in the matrix? Why does a refrigerator need to be an Internet of Things device? Are we losing control of our life with the Internet of Things? What do you think?
It's a good question. And a funny story, I had a conversation with one of my teammates on that, and I asked, why the heck are we connecting these kind of devices? Because we're able to do. And this is the most honest answer in most of the cases. But nevertheless, connecting devices can also build really certain use cases for us, making our life easier and more comfortable when it's done in the right way. But just connecting things because you're able to do is surely a stupid way to do the digitization. Yeah. So at the moment, I have no idea for what reason my fridge should be connected, but there might be good reason. And there may be a use case for that in future, which I don't know yet. But what's important is once it is connected, we need to take care that it's connected securely from the first stage. And as Bruce mentioned in his intro, it's becoming more and more important that we have not any longer only authentication from users to systems. We need it from systems to systems, from processes to processes. So it's a much bigger regime of authentication we need in future to build this secure connectivity.
We have another question that I want to...
Let me jump in and explain quickly why your refrigerator is connected, because there's a really good explanation. So 15 years ago, when someone wanted to build a refrigerator, they would make some kind of circuitry and controls. They'd make custom electronics for the refrigerator. Today, you want to build a refrigerator, you pull a Raspberry Pi off the shelf, and you write some software. And that Raspberry Pi comes with an internet stack, comes with a video port, comes with an audio port. So you've got that technology already built in because it's cheaper. And once it's there, it's cheap to use. So that's why all these things are connected, because the way we build them has changed from custom software and custom circuitry to just an off-the-shelf CPU.
Well, thanks, Bruce, for pointing that out and the magic of the Internet of Things. I have one question that I want to direct to you, Alex and Bruce, because it's on the political regulation that we were talking about. It says companies like Facebook or TikTok need to be forced to comply with local rules and to be held accountable for taxes primarily and rules, of course. Otherwise, discussing cybersecurity is senseless. Do you agree?
I have no opinion on tax laws. I mean, countries should pass tax laws that they think are appropriate. And, I think if we have a more consistency in those, then you'll end up with better enforcement. Right now, a lot of countries have mechanisms by which you can shift your revenue there. But that's not something I'm an expert in. On security stuff, I don't agree. There's a bunch of companies that are really motivated here, and they are victims of either crimes or geopolitical attacks. And the idea that you can just regulate your way into security is absolutely false.
Bruce?
I'm more optimistic, but it's definitely not the only thing you can do. But I think we do have to change the economic incentives, because right now the economic incentives. I mean, SolarWinds is a great example. I mean that is a private equity funded company, and their economic incentives were to make their stuff as lousy as possible without losing customers. Right? That was their economic model, and that's just not a good one for security.
We have another question that is very broad, so probably each one of you want to jump in. It says, what does digital sovereignty mean to you? Is it realistic at all? Maybe if you want to start, Alex.
Good luck.
Digital sovereignty?
Yeah.
I mean, so this is one of the key questions is, are citizens in countries allowed to voluntarily opt into the use of products or to be part of communities that are run out of other countries, right? So we keep on having these arguments around who gets to control multinational networks. And last year there's a big brouhaha in the U.S. around TikTok, in which the roles were reversed. Traditionally, you've had non-American jurisdictions, especially in Europe, complaining about American law and the lack of control over American companies. And in this case, the United States was complaining about a product that Americans were choosing to use that was made by a Chinese company, and whether or not who gets to make the decisions about how that's managed. I think. So one, I mean, this is super complicated. We don't have enough time to talk about it. Like, there are countries that have really good arguments here, and there are countries that their arguments are around keeping the people in power, right? So that's what's going on in India right now. So, and so there's a lot of people that throw out some kind of basic ideas here that don't think through the actual texture of what it is like to give sovereignty to all of the different countries in the world, especially in situations where the really horrible things are being promulgated. The Myanmar having is it a violation of digital sovereignty for the Myanmar government to have their mechanism shut down for justifying the genocide that they're conducting against their own minorities, right? Like, it gets really, really complicated very fast. What I would like to see is I'd like to see democracies work together on this. There's the things that, between the US and Europe, the vast majority of goals are the same of what they want out of digital platforms. And I would love to see kind of an alliance of democracies here regulate in a way that is compatible, and that explicitly sets rules around human rights that then are flow down and are a benefit to citizens of either developing democracies like India or non-democracies like Myanmar. But that kind of cooperation does not seem likely on the horizon.
But you're saying that is feasible, Bruce, an alliance of democracies on that issue?
So I don't know. So I think I'm going to be very broad here with this broad question. I think we're seeing a mismatch in the size of government units. And historically, that's always been having to do with the speed of communication and transportation. City-states and local moving into, in the mid-1700s, or later in the 1800s, things that are kind of the U.S. state size, European country size. And now we have the United States, the EU. They're all representing the kind of size of thing that with communication saturation you can effectively deal with. And now we are getting more into global problems. And whether it's the internet or climate change or bio, I mean, these are all global problems. And now the large country-sized governments aren't really suitable for the task. This is a way bigger problem that we're going to solve in this panel, but I think that's what we're seeing here. And that's why a lot of things aren't working. Because the EU size, the US size, even the India size, the China size is not a really good size of government to deal with these issues. We need bigger, and we don't really have those mechanisms.
Well, as always, we are strictly regulated here time-wise on that panel, so we have exactly 1 minute left for your take, Thomas.
Yeah, so I would say, first of all, when we talk about digital sovereignty, it's a question how we would define that. To really achieve full sovereignty, it's quite impossible, I guess. But what do we need instead? At least we need the ability to judge and to measure technology, which we not have our hands on and where we don't in control of the supply chain. This is becoming more important than ever before, in my view. So certification, inspection, and these kind of things, we need to work on these kind of skill sets to have that at least here when we're depending on foreign markets.
Oh, thanks so much, Thomas. I hope the talking heads started making sense, and I really hope we can reconnect next year in person. Alex can bring his family, as he already announced. And thanks so much, Alex, Bruce, Thomas. Thanks so much for putting this panel together, Peter. And, we will see you soon,
All right.
hopefully.
Next year in Antarctica.